Welcome to the second meeting of CSRIC 7, which I now open. Today we will be hearing from our 6 working group chairs regarding their plans to approach their work over the next couple of months, as well as their membership for each of the working groups. Oh, wait a second, I'm sorry. Also, I believe that in the last meeting, we somehow overlooked introducing someone who's very important to CSRIC 7, and that is Kurian Jacob, who's on my right. He is the DFO, the Deputy DFO, and can always answer your questions or help you with anything that you might need. Thanks, Kurian. Charlotte.
Hi, this is Charlotte Field. Thank you all for joining us today. I believe that, like Suzanne said, we're going to go through the working groups. We know that they've just gotten started. Without further ado, I'll ask Working Group Alert, Originator, Standard Operating Procedures to stand up and take the floor.
Oh, I forgot to do that. We're not taking a vote. It doesn't matter.
Okay. So, Craig?
Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Sorry.
I was going standard operating procedures. I'm like, it was working group 1, but yeah, we do have a title.
Do you want to give him the, or do you want to come up here to do the presentation? Or?
Sure.
And then we have a device so that you can change the slides as you go.
Okay, if you go back to the original charter for CSRIC 7, one of the work groups, the first work group, was looking at the process of alerting, the protocols and procedures we use to activate the system. In the last couple of years, we've had several incidents to call into question these issues. We had the nuclear attack warning that was issued by Civil Defense in Hawaii as a test message, but went out as an actual alert system. And what's interesting is our system doesn't know to differentiate between a practice and an actual event. If you send an actual event and thought it was internal and it gets out, it's going to activate the system. That's the way it's designed. So this leads to the question, with all of the new proliferations of ways people get information, are the protocols in place to ensure that when we detect something that we need to issue a warning on, does the system activate, go out, and reach the intended audience? And can we further with technology reduce the amount of warning that goes out, particularly as some of the originators of warnings, such as National Weather Service, moves away from county warnings to more geographically targeted warnings, and incorporate that into the infrastructure. So this is, again, from the origination, is to look at the procedures between the stakeholders, the communication providers, the originators, and break this down into several key areas that we need to look at. And so the first one is establishing and maintaining the communication between the industrial stakeholders, broadcaster, cable stuff, and the originators. We have seen, since we have built the last time, this system, in many cases, in most states, I would probably say the IPAW system is actually activated more for silver alerts and amber alerts than it is for other types of emergencies. So that relationship and the willingness of broadcasters to carry this message, which is voluntary when it's issued by state or local governments, was actually tested during one of the amber alerts. If you remember, there was an incident in California where, because they had a fleeing felon suspect with a child, they issued the alert for the entire state. And there was a lot of blowback and complaints, was that even necessary? But once the apprehension was made, people said, okay, that made sense. But if we don't have a strong working relationship between the originators and the people who carry that, we do run the risk of fatigue and the possibility that this will not always happen. So this is a matter of trust, but it also means we have to ensure that what is coming from the originators is warranting the activation of the system and all that entails. These relationships, again, leveraged during emergencies, but building it before we actually get there. Looking at our current systems and IPAWs, and there'll be people from FEMA and other folks that represent IPAWs, but if you look at all the tools that we have out there, do originators have multiple ways to get into the system? And something this slide doesn't take into account, but something we have to look at, is cybersecurity and spoofing of the system. Can we authenticate the originators to make sure the people that are actually authorized to activate the system are the ones accessing the system, and do they have redundant survivable communications to ensure they can get into the system? And so IPAWS is here. Antoine, good to see you. And then the importance of what should be in the message and the ability to quickly retract errors that go out there. I will tell you, if we build a system that will never send out a fake or wrong message, we will not send out the real message when it's needed. Our bias has got to be to make sure the originating system gets the message out. But if we then see that it's an overexposed or the situation's changed or it was inaccurate, we correct it. And that's not something that we saw happen. And this is probably one of the big concerns in Hawaii. Even when they recognized that the message had gone out, there was not a corrective mechanism for them to quickly send a new transmission going false alert and shut the system down. So this feedback loop needs to be done. And then the last piece on this, what is an alert versus what's a warning versus when certain systems should be used? I think we have over-leveraged, in some cases, IPAWS to where it is now a notification tool. And that's not the purpose of warning systems. And I think warning systems need to be held to a much higher standard. And we need to, again, look at our SOPs and going, at what level and at what access are we turning on certain systems to notify the public of things to be aware of versus warnings where we want them to do a specific action to change an outcome. And that outcome in that situation has to be of such a nature that the only way to effectively communicate that is to activate the warning systems. So we've got some work to do. We've had good processes in place, but we can make improvements. The small print up there is the committee. I'm pretty sure as we go through this, the FCC will be publishing these lists publicly. You'll see that. And our next task is actually going to be setting up our working within our working group, some co-chairs, and break this into pieces to look at based upon that. And our time frame is September 2020. So our job is to produce a report back to the leadership on the recommendations, and hopefully where we find consensus, but also to focus on, I think, emerging issues and challenges that we may not get consensus, but would also be useful to provide back to the committee. So any questions? Thank you.
So next is Working Group 2, Managing Security Risk in the Transition in 5G with Lee Thibodeau. And Lee's on the phone.
I am on the phone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. If I could impose upon someone to advance slides for me, I will call it out. Perfect. Thank you. Working Group 2 also has the title, Managing Risks in the Transition to 5G Networks. And briefly, the background, 5G networks are becoming more and more widely deployed, and the pace of those deployments is quickening. And as that happens, some 5G architectures begin to incorporate the risks of security concerns that are being carried forward from other network implementations. If you could move up to slide number 2, please. And those risks that begin to carry forward and begin to be introduced in 5G networks can affect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those 5G networks. So the FCC has directed our working group to first take a look at the review the vulnerabilities to 5G networks that have been carried forward from earlier wireless technologies, and then recommend best practices to mitigate each of those vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. And one more slide. I think I've gotten ahead of myself. Thank you. Second, the Commission has asked us to formulate some recommendations to the 3GPP Security Working Group to mitigate those risks based on risk level and also to discuss remediation expense. Finally, they've asked us to identify optional features in 3GPP standards that might expose 5G risks to security. Next slide. In working through the deliverables, I should caution the council that until we have a chance to assemble the entire working group, some of these thoughts are mine alone, and once I have a chance to work with the entire group of experts, we'll probably do a little revision and refinement of these. But basically, we think it's going to be important to review some of the lessons learned from earlier technology advances and gather input from some of the industry experts. And I'm beginning to solicit a list of those that we might bring in as subject matter experts to the working group. We also want to take a look at some of the existing best practices in the industry and focus on that transition as we connect 5G networks to existing network cores. Next slide, please. This slide lists the working group members. Next slide, please. I'm watching this on my screen, and the screen is not advancing. The status of the working group membership, as you saw in the previous slide, has been finalized. Chair has been established. We'll be looking to involve some subject matter experts for presentations to the team for specific roles and so forth that we'll discuss in subsequent meetings. Next slide. The near-term status of the working group, we'll be scheduling biweekly working group conference calls and may go to weekly conference calls after we get into the serious work of the working group. My target is to have a short call organizationally with the working group this week yet, so I'll be contacting them as soon as the public notice is out. I've communicated with Addis to establish a document library and should be able to publish that to the working group members at the first meeting. Next slide, please. Our deliverables, June of 2020, we're committed to making a report on the risks from 5G vulnerabilities and best practices for mitigation back to the council. And in December of 2020, a recommendation on updates to 3GPP standards. Next slide. Our next steps, obviously, to assemble the team and begin the conference calls and develop a more specific work process. We have the document repository in progress. And finally, I think it's important, as you'll hear in the next working group presentation, that we coordinate the work of Working Group 2 with Working Group 3 to ensure that we provide a more complete response to the council, but also ensure that no gaps are left in the reports between the two working groups. Next slide, please. That concludes my initial update to the group. If there are any questions, I will attempt to answer them.
Any questions for Lee on the phone?
Yeah. Yes.
No questions in the room? No questions on the phone? So thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to Working Group 3, which is Managing Security Risk in Emerging 5G. And Farouk is going to give us an update on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Lee provided a very nice segue into my activity. As he mentioned just right now, Working Group 2 and 3 needs to be very well coordinated because we have some overlapping activity. And Working Group 3's title, Managing Security Risk in Emerging 5G Implementation, Initial Work Plan. So this is what we will look into. And in a way of background, 3GPP Release 16 is going to be frozen, the term that we use in 3GPP, in March 2020 timeframe. And there is a potential for risk introduced into core network by weaknesses in security aspects. Security aspects is a hot item. Everybody talks about it. So we want to make sure that we manage, we mitigate, and we understand it. So FCC has also directed CSRIC 7 to evaluate 3GPP release 15 and 16 and identify any risk area and develop risk mitigation strategy to minimize risks in 5G core network. And this is part that Lee was mentioning, that Working Group 2 mentioned, that we need to coordinate well to make sure that we don't overlap too much and we have the whole answer, the whole system end-to-end answered. In addition, another objective that's very important, if there are options provided in 3GPP, which 3GPP does options all the time. Sometimes we say we option ourselves to death, but if there are any options, we need to understand which optional features are the right ones for North America to understand which ones should be implemented or kind of provide a comparison between them. So that's another objective of our working group. So we have 2 reports coming up. The first report is network reliability and security risk reduction. And this is basically to understand what are the relevant 3GPP specifications and what are the any risks introduced in release 15 and 16 of 3GPP. And we also have the second report on recommendation how to mitigate risk introduced by release 15 and release 16 standards. So identify what are the options that are in the 3GPP standards and so forth, and kind of say these options may have some impact more than the others, and kind of provide some benefit cost analysis on what options make sense for North America. We have the list of members here, and I say this now, and I say that always, without our members who are volunteers, the work would not progress. So we really appreciate the work of all these members. We haven't even started yet, but I'm going to say this now, thank you. I'm going to say that every meeting. I'm going to thank them every time. The status, we have finalized the group members. We will have biweekly conference calls at the beginning. And if the past few CSRIC that I was sharing, an indication when it gets close to the deadline, we go to the Charlotte here says, yeah, I remember that last time. So we will have additional calls as needed. And as always, ATIS has kindly agreed to provide us with the repository. It's a great tool. It's really a great tool. If you haven't used it, all the documents there, all the email lists. So it's a really good way for us to communicate and have it. So we appreciate ATIS for providing that tool to us. As I mentioned, there are 2 reports. The first report is due September of 2020, and that's on risk introduced by release 15 and 16 5G standard. And second report on what are the recommendations to mitigate risk introduced by those releases, and what do we do with the optional features and so forth. The next steps, we're going to have to develop a detailed work plan, of course, and we'll have our biweekly conference calls, and we already have talked about we're going to ask Travis to give us a report from the last CSRIC. I have aligned some folks from 3GPP to come and give us presentation on what is going on in 3GPP, the experts in the area. So we will have all those discussions so that we have a full, good understanding of what is already available to us, and then we will talk about what's the next step and provide the detail. So the next report, we will have a lot more detail available. With that, I will see if there are any questions.
Are there any questions on the phone or in the room for Farouk? Thank you, Farouk.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Working Group 4, 911 Security Vulnerabilities during the IP transition, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Mary Boyd.
Good, Madam Chair.
Mary, on the phone?
Hear me okay? Hello, are you there? Can you hear me? Suzanne? Can you hear me? Suzanne?
Why don't we move on?
And come back.
Mary.
Mary, you might be having some telecoms difficulty, so we're going to move on to Pat Roberts, Working Group 5, Improving Broadband Resiliency.
it's broadcast resiliency. If it was broadband, I wouldn't be up here. But anyway, some of y'all know me and have worked with me before. But thank you. Let me start by saying I got to thank Chairman Pye. We've been through a number of hurricanes in Florida, and Chairman Pye has been the most attentive chairman I've seen in many years. Every time there's a disaster or a storm, he shows up. He has been supportive. He also asks hard questions. So if y'all relay to him, we appreciate his support of not only broadcasters, but everybody in that. And Lisa, you've done an incredible job building Homeland Security here. And I remember days when we shut down the EAS office. There wasn't one 25 years ago. So thank y'all. Suzanne, it's been great working with you. So Working Group 5, we're going to focus mainly on broadcast. And I think most of you know it. If you live in an area with hurricanes or storms or earthquakes or fires or floods, if you lose your power, the only lines of communication really are the radio stations. So, and we've learned in Florida with all the hurricanes. I've been involved in every one of them since Hurricane Andrew up in '92 through the ones last year with Hurricane Michael. Radio now partners with TV because radio stations a lot of times don't have newsrooms. But TV has newsroom, but nobody can see TV. So we've built relationships. So our working group is going to be great. We look forward to working with everybody. So I got to make sure I do this right. So our main thing is we're going to make sure, as a group, we were instructed to look at what we do when we suffer major damage to towers or transmission capability during major storms or any other type disaster. We're going to expand that to include not only that as first and foremost, but studios, control rooms, all the apparatus that allows us to get outside and reach people. Next slide is, we've been directed to update the current best practices, and I think there are a number of companies that will be on this working group, as well as FEMA and other people that have worked with us, that will be able to help us put together for everybody in broadcast to understand whether it's a hurricane, a fire, a flood, or an earthquake, what they need to do and to be prepared from their tower to their studios to all the different pieces of it. So we'll be working on that to improve the plan so we will know what to do if we do have one of these disasters. And each one of them is different. No two are the same, but hopefully we'll have plans in place. And at that point, I think I should say Jeff Littlejohn's going to be our co-chair. Jeff has been involved in engineering with iHeart for many years. They have more radio stations than anybody, but he's got a team that when there are disasters, he's got people around the country that go immediately to help that market get back on the air. So the experience at iHeart is one of the most incredible backgrounds in this industry. Our reports will coming back. The working group will identify the risks we have when we face these storms, disasters, and other things. We'll also look at the best practices the FCC and groups have done, but also companies have put in place. Almost every major broadcast group now has emergency plans in place for what the stations and their staff, because you've also got to keep the employees operating. It's unlike some other industries in this world of communication. We have to have people to run the equipment, to get it out, and to go keep us on the air. So we'll put that together working, and I think we've got a great working group. The next, we'll study operations and station backup for the power in the sites. The partnership, and I mentioned it earlier, Craig and I have worked together on this since 20 years ago in Florida. If you don't have the partnership between radio and television, there's a big drop in communication. So we're going to explain that to everybody, so hopefully everybody will go back and create these partnerships. The other thing we learned in Hurricane Michael, unlike any previous storm, is the social media aspect. Even stations that were down were able to communicate with their news crews through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So even when they were down temporarily for a few hours, they were still broadcasting their newscast on Facebook. So we're going to add that as a component to being the first informers and informing people. The next slide has our list of our people. We will probably ask for some subject matter experts from other groups. I know there are other people on this council this time, like Cox, that we would love to have Cox involved with us too, since you have a number of TV and radio stations today. Apollo could join us later, but and you've got a number of our stations in Florida. So I've worked with you and Scripps, and on the TV side have done an incredible job. So we're probably going to add some more people or ask them to be subject matter experts. Next, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our membership established. We may add a few people, but Jeff Littlejohn from iHeart will be helping me put it all together. We're going to start doing conference calls. We'll probably do, as we gather the data, we'll probably do it at least monthly, maybe twice a month, but we'll do one in October, November. We'll start gathering information from various groups and individual stations and start compiling our best practices. We're going to try to have a draft ready for y'all to look at in January, and our final report is due in March. We're one of the earliest reports that has to be turned in. So, Mr. Chairman, I think we'll make that. I've got down the list. We've got to work on our, we've got to set some dates on specific things, but the draft's going to try to be ready in January. We'll get member input in February, get our working group to finalize it by the end of February, and submit it to you for your review, and then the council by the end of March. And the next steps are we'll start conducting our biweekly, monthly task force and conference calls. And if anybody has questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Any questions on the phone or in the room for Pat?
Madam Chairman?
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Do we have Mary?
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me okay now?
Now we can, Mary. Thank you very much. Mary's going
My
to,
apologies.
no problem. Mary's going to cover 911 security vulnerabilities during the IP transition, so we'll turn it over to Mary.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My apologies for not being there. I'm trying, as you could probably hear road noise earlier. The Working Group 4 focus is really a continuation of work that came out of CSRIC 6, Working Group 1, which was looking at the minimizing outages as we transition from legacy 911 to an IP 911 environment. One element that we recognized was that we had a security concerns. We didn't have quite all the expertise we needed, so I want to at least express our appreciation for the Commission considering this one for a CSRIC initiative. Working Group 4 is really going to once again focus on that transition from the legacy 911 environment into IP networks, but specifically we're going to look at these when we're in a hybrid state of both blend of networks. As they are commingled, we can run into some potential security risks. So our background is really focused on that. One of the examples of a security function would be data transfer not functioning on the security side of an IP 911 environment. For the slide on our objective, and my apologies, Madam Chairman, I cannot see the slide, so if I'm out of sync, somebody bring me back. On our objectives, the Commission has directed us to identify those security risks in that network as they transition. And then, in addition to the risk, they've also asked us to work on a report where we look at the vulnerabilities on a scale and account for both the risk level and a remediation expense. And so that will be in a subsequent report that I'll review in just a moment. On slide 4, our deliverables for our first report are, as I indicated earlier, in the hybrid state of the transition of architectures, and then as we commingle the network elements. The deliverables that are on this page, as indicated by other work group members, have not been totally vetted. Some are from the Commission documents, some are just from my experience working on this initiative in the last CSRIC, but they still need to be vetted, Madam Chairman, with our work group, which I hope to get together in the next 2 weeks, at least by the end of the month. But I hope for us to be able to look at any historical outages that were caused by a security risk to the network, we'd look at the transitions in those networks in a hybrid environment. We would identify security functions that are available to protect that data as it transverses through the IP networks. And then we would evaluate our current best practices. For those who were on the last initiative, we went, Working Group 1 on CSRIC 6, went through and updated all the best practices to apply to a next generation 911. And I'm not sure that we actually were able to add the security piece of it because of the lack of expertise. So we'll evaluate all of our best practices, and then we'll also look if there's any barriers to implementation as we look at our security recommendations. On the next slide for our report number 2, this is related to, once again, the review and the hybrid of the vulnerabilities, but we're going to put the vulnerabilities on a scale that accounts for the risk level. We'll study those risk levels, once again looking at the best practices, and that's when we'll get into the economic disadvantages in this report, try to identify the cost and see if there are any barriers to actually moving forward to implement the mitigation measures. And that final report will be really on the magnitude of deploying what we recommend. Our working group members are on slide 5. For working group 4, a lot of the people that were on the last initiative volunteered to step up again. And to Farouk's point, we could not do these really valuable reports without there's about 24 of us, I believe, that have stepped up to volunteer, and then we will bring on other subject matter experts. For the new folks that will be joining, I think they're not new to 911 at all, and it won't take them very long to get up to speed. I want to just, there are a lot of people I should draw out on this just because they continue to dedicate their careers to 911 and actually the advancement of it. But the one thing we noticed, Madam Chairman, last time was as we were being proactive on best practices, we didn't have ATIS in terms of the NRSC who works on the best practices and hosts that with ATIS. So Jackie, I'm sure she's on by bridge. I just want to thank her and the ATIS team for joining and working with us in partnership. I think that will move us along as we vet those and propose those to the council. And we look forward to working with Russell as well as our advisors from the commission. The next slide, on slide 7, is our status. We have just finalized our working group members. We will, as I indicated earlier, we will get the co-chairs identified and then get the membership all together by the end of the month. On slide 8, I'm proposing September 26th, but to all the working group 4 members who might be on the web or on this bridge, no, you've not missed an email from me. I'll get that out when I come off the road, and then we'll start on our calendars. We'll also see if we can draw in the prior reports coming out of CSRIC 6, because we identified all the network elements in the transitions, so that'll be a very valuable set of documents for us to use. And then if we just move on to the slide 10. I just put out a sample of what our, basically what the plan schedule will look like, but we will identify our 2 report timeframes, one of which is in June of 2020, the other in December of 2020, and then we will work backwards on our deliverables in time to get those before the council. That concludes our summary. I look forward to this initiative. Madam Chairman, any questions from the council?
Any questions on the phone or in the room for Mary? Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Did an excellent job without it in front of you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to hear from Working Group 6, SIP, Security Vulnerabilities. And Danny McPherson is on the phone, so we'll turn it over to Danny.
Yeah, I am on the phone. Thank you, Madam Chairman and council members. So I am the chair of Working Group 6. We're going to be evaluating SIP security vulnerabilities within this working group. We can move to slide 2 now. So as most of you are aware, SIP is an application layer protocol for creating, modifying, and terminating sessions, and including internet telephone calls, which certainly has, as we've heard previously, some 911 and emergency communications implications, among other things. The initial standards for SIP are 2 decades old as of March, and and a lot of work has gone into securing implementations and deployment models and so forth, fortifying network infrastructure and whatnot. But the objectives of this working group, if we can move on to slide 3 quickly, is to review the security vulnerabilities affecting SIP today, and understand how those vulnerabilities are being addressed by the industry, as well as any gaps that might exist. So as you can imagine, that will certainly involve assessing all the prior work, the corpus of work that's been done, both within the FCC and much broader in the industry to assess these vulnerabilities, and then identifying any gaps that exist there, and then in addition to that, the best practices and gaps in those best practices, and then proposing any new best practices or work efforts that may need to occur from that point. Certainly, again, this work will be informed by prior work that's been done in the FCC and beyond, and we'll go from there. So on to slide 4, please, with participants. So we had a bit of a surge at the end of our participant membership drive for subject matter experts. We had some fantastic ones initially, and I'm pleased to say that 15 working group co-workers here that are well qualified, and I think we're going to be able to produce an excellent work product for the FCC. We also have already engaged or discussed with a number of potential SME briefers that were started to identify those that may provide some information to the FCC. We have finalized this working group membership that you see in front of you, so I thank the FCC for their efforts in that. And so let's move on to slide 5. Again here, we have just finalized the working group membership and are really excited about the folks that are willing to participate. We've got a broad spectrum of folks with a lot of expertise here, and I think it's going to lend itself well to an excellent working product for the FCC. Our intention, now that that's done, is to hold our initial kickoff meetings, identify task groups and actions, and the members and potential external sources we may want to pull in to better inform the working group. And then to begin our work on, we don't have a deliverable for an interim report at this point, although we'll make a draft report certainly available to the FCC as early as possible. Our final report is due, if we want to go to slide 6, in March of 2021. We do hope to beat that deadline if possible, but certainly we'll have some draft reports to the FCC prior to that for the council and members' feedback, and so that we can improve those and the quality of those work products. So, at the end of the day, as far as slide 7 and next steps, they're all pretty intuitive. Basically, get to work. We've got the membership finalized, figure out what we need to do based on our charter and what we've committed to, and then identify what it's going to take to get us there, and assign our task leaders, and begin a pretty reasonable cadence of work meetings for the team, and then start getting to writing and identifying resources that will be helpful to help us do that. So, I know I moved through that fairly quickly, but that's kind of it. Here's our membership. Here's what we're going to do, and we hope that it'll be a quality work product. I believe with the team we pulled together it will. And from that perspective, that concludes my initial update to the group on Working Group 6, SIP security vulnerabilities. So, any questions?
Any questions for Danny on the phone or in the room? Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the working group chairs for their updates, as well as Curry and Suzanne for their support. I did a misstep and I forgot to take roll call, so I'm going to do that at the end before we end the day. So, Brandon Apley, are you here? Mark Annis?
Here.
Thank you. Mary Boyd, we know. Wade Buckner, he's here, right? Brian Daly?
Yes, Brian Daly's here.
Thank you. Jay English is here. Lori Flaherty? Craig is here. Robert Gessner? James Gerke?
I'm here.
Who just spoke? I'm sorry.
I think you said Dorothy. I'm here.
No, I was saying James Gerke. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Mark Hass is here. I'm here. Antoine Johnson?
Here.
Thank you. Farouk is here. Chandra Kotaru? Jeff Littlejohn?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Tim Lorello? Michelle Minelli McInerney?
Yeah, Michelle's not available. My name is Andy Stern. I'm sitting in for her from the
Okay.
National Weather Service.
Thank you very much, Andy. Danny McPherson is on the phone. Joe Meyer?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Thank you. Susan Miller is here. And thanks to Addis for being such a good participant. I really enjoyed participating with the Addis work products. Richard Perlotto?
Here.
Thank you. Michael Rapp? Pat's here. Jeff Robertson?
Jeff is here.
Thank you. Travis Russell?
Travis is here.
Thank you, Travis. Francisco Sanchez Jr.? And we got you, Dorothy. Lee Thibodeau is on the phone. Brian Trosper?
Here.
Thank you. Steve Watkins is here. And also John Williamson? Well, thank you all, and again, thanks to the chairs for giving an update of where we are. I think next meeting will be a little bit more lively. We'll have some progress on some of the objectives of each of the working groups. And the next meeting is scheduled for December 10th, which I believe is a Tuesday at 1:00 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you either in the room or having you on the phone with us on December 10th. Thanks again.
And I want to also say thank you, and those were great presentations. We are going to be releasing a public notice later this week that will list all of the working group members. We're also going to be posting the presentations from today on the CSRIC website. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me. And that is now the end of the second meeting of CSRIC 7. It's adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.